So, first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your name and where you're based and what you do.
So my name is Abal Korala. I'm originally from Kathmandu, Nepal. I was born and raised in Nepal. Then I spent 2 years in India for high school, and I was in Pakistan for medical school, which I completed in 2009. Um, late 2010, 2011, I was in New York. I did research for a year and a half. And then I was in Chicago for my internal medicine residency. So I spent 3 years over there. And after that, I decided to work for 2 years. So I worked as a hospitalist in Pittsburgh. And then I moved to Seattle in 2016 for my nephrology or kidney fellowship, followed by glomerular fellowship or filter disease fellowship. So I completed my filter disease fellowship in 2019. And since the beginning of 2020, I've been a faculty at UW Harborview and also at UW MC. Um, as a kidney doctor. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abal.
Mm.
And this is a course about well-being and well-being for health professionals. The first question I have for you is, how would you describe well-being to be? Like many people, have different definition of well-being and somewhat difficult to pinpoint what exactly it is. But for you, how would you describe well-being to be?
I mean, the definition has definitely changed over a decade. I've been a meditator for over a decade. I used to meditate for half an hour, but now I do at least an hour of sitting. And then if you include other practices, it's definitely more. But I think well-being for me is, having that clarity, having that emotional equipoise where I'm not being pulled or pushed by various thoughts. Sometimes, just because of conditions, I may get pulled in or pushed in one direction or the other, but just having that gap and in a state of groundedness or emotional equipoise, I would call that as well-being.
Hmm. So what you're saying is well-being is not just about the physical um, well-being, but it's much more than that. Sounds like
Yeah,
it's much more of an
yeah, yeah. I thought you wanted to ask me about mental well-being, so
yeah.
that's what I meant. But obviously, physical well-being is like being in a state of good physical health
Hmm. Hmm.
and having absence of disease.
Hmm. No, it's tremendous coming from actually someone like you who's a doctor, and oftentimes maybe doctors focus more on just like the physical health, but then it's beyond that. That well-being is actually clarity. You mentioned the word clarity,
Hmm.
and that says a lot about what well-being is about. You know, um, and this is more of a personal to you, but like, why does your well-being matter to you? How is it important to you in doing what you do?
I mean, now it's so much part of my life that I can't separate it from my life. Previously I would compartmentalize things. Okay, so when I was a resident or a fellow, I'd meditate for half an hour and then have that as a separate activity from my life. But it's just now beautifully integrated into my life. I don't even think of it as different
Mhm.
from my life. The challenge is like not to get caught up in different reactive states, which I inevitably do. I still do, and then you just learn in retrospect. But then with more and more practice, you gain more and more clarity, and then you start forming a gap between your authentic inner self and then your reactive mind states where you necessarily do not have to react to every situation where it's like a conditioned response, like the Pavlov's experiment where the goal is to find that gap, and then once you find that gap, you just kind of widen it, so that to every situation you have the ability to respond as opposed to react. So you develop a state of emotional equipoise, or equanimity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, what led you to meditation to begin with?
Well, I was always drawn towards different spiritual traditions, but I was, even though I come from a Hindu family, I was not particularly religious. And I came to the US in 2010, and mindfulness was a big thing in New York at that time. Had, been part of mainstream medicine, and I was doing research, and I just stumbled into it. So started reading, and then attended few retreats, and then that's how I got into meditation.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Now, you are a doctor and interacting with the suffering and the pain of people on a regular basis, I imagine, and how does that impact you as a person? And how does your practice actually support you in that regard?
Um, so it's also a relative thing. Like compared to 2011, when I was a first year internal medicine resident or an intern. Now, I mean, with my practice, I do not really react that much. I mean, with equanimity, you're still able to feel their pain, but you don't drown yourself, with their suffering. You have a sense of centeredness so that you don't get carried away, and you have that, you know, you can still maintain your objective lens. Um, and so that has definitely changed.
Can you imagine yourself actually not having that practice and going through this particular time of a public health crisis, the pandemic?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I prepared, I started meditating for the pandemic or for these unforeseen things. My practice was completely independent. It's just that it has grown over time, and has definitely helped me during the pandemic. But I wouldn't say that, that, I'd somehow foreseen the pandemic, or, I've been through various situations at work that was like quite challenging, but I mean, in a way, did the practice help me prepare for those situations? Definitely, but the intention to start practicing was way different than I mean, I didn't. I mean, I knew that it would help me in those difficult situations, but if you start out at the time of crisis, it may be more difficult to start a brand new practice than starting out when you're in a better mind state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I imagine that, many people want to practice something like what you do, but then, you know, perhaps it's so difficult for them to integrate that in their day-to-day life, or just simply fail to do so. What are some of the key um, ingredients? What are some tips that you would offer to someone who would like to practice something like what you do?
I mean, as a healthcare professional, it depends, where you are in your career. As an attending, you may have slightly more free time compared to being a resident, and but then you may get carried away by your other duties, or you may have children to tend to. So all of us are busy. What But there are various ways you can integrate mindfulness practice. One is, of course, sitting practice, where you just sit down and you just sit, and that's the meaning of sitting. And, you're naturally taught, and you have an anchor point, a breath, or could be a clock on the wall, or you're just noticing the rise and fall of your chest wall as you inhale and exhale. And those could be your anchor points, and naturally thoughts arise. That's the job of the mind, is to think. And you just sit there, you know and you don't react to those thoughts. Take each thought with an attitude of being non-judgmental, and then you try to see if there's an underlying emotion, whether it's overt or subtle, and let go of it. So that's definitely there. And if you want to do the more, the better. I mean, and there are now research studies that if you sit more, that leads to more changes in your brain, what we now known as neuroplasticity. But the real life situation is not just sitting, right? I mean, sitting in a way could be easy because you're not dealing with people, you're not dealing with different situations, you're just locking yourself into a room where you just with your back erect, you're just trying to observe your thoughts with non-judgmental attitude. But the real life is the battlefield where dealing with people, environment, and you know different things. And it's like how you uh, react, or the fruit of your practice is how you respond or react to different situations. But that naturally comes, as if you extend your sitting practice. If you've been meditating for 5 minutes, if you do a 10-minute practice, that's more beneficial. Do a 15-minute practice, that's even more beneficial than doing it 10 minutes. So it's all relative. But besides that, there are other things you can do, like mindful walking, mindfulness bell. You can now we have, like, there are these various apps that you can download on your phone, and then set yourself a reminder that if you're getting caught up in different thoughts, to have that bell be timed like every 15 minutes, so that every 15 minutes you just take in 3 breaths in and out, and then reset the system. I mean, there are other things that you can incorporate too. Sitting is super important, but whatever one can do, I think, would definitely be beneficial. I mean, doing something is always better than doing nothing.
So, what do you actually do, like as a regular thing? You're busy also too, I imagine, and just like anybody, probably just from the time you wake up until you go to sleep, it's like every moment counts, I imagine. So, like, is there a particular routine you have that you can actually share with us? Like, how do you start your day? How do you end your day?
Yeah. So I'm a morning person, and then the benefit of being in an academic practice is, overnight, most of the pages don't go to you directly. They're filtered through the fellows. Um, so most of my nights are very quiet, unless I'm on service when I'm seeing patients in the hospital. Um, I wake up early, between 4 to 4:30, and I have my sitting practice for 1 hour, and then I go for a run around Green Lake. That takes me like 40 minutes. So those are the two practices that kind of complement each other. And then that's my well-being practice. I don't run almost every day. I run at least 5 days a week. But my meditation practice has been more or less consistent. I mean, except for those times where I'm traveling, or once or twice that I was caught in different situations. But that, otherwise, I haven't left my sitting practice. I've been pretty consistent with that. The duration has definitely changed. Like previously, I used to meditate for 25 to 30 minutes, but now I at least do it for an hour every day. And sometimes I do it even for more than an hour if I get time. Not like, continuously, but during the day if I get time.
What would you say to those people who say, okay, I can't sit for 1 hour, that's too much commitment, but I still want to do something. Uh, what's what would you recommend?
So the paradox of mindfulness meditation is that most people who can't sit are the ones who likely need to meditate, as opposed to people who are very calm and in equipoise. But the goal of mindfulness meditation is not to, and the goal of sitting is to understand, if you meditate every day for 5 or 6 years, you'll start to realize that thoughts are just impersonal. I mean, they just arise because you had a bad day or because of many conditions that were beyond your control. And, those conditions were likely very, very impersonal. So you get a sense of a gap that, hey, even though I have this anger rising in me, it's a thought and it'll just pass on its own when the conditions change. So I don't have to react to that like in a not in an unskillful way. Um, so you do develop that sense of a gap. But the whole idea of mindfulness is to understand that you're you know as a human being with the with thick cerebral cortex, you're bound to think when you sit, and that's okay. I mean, your thoughts can arise from various parts, and it's just that you don't have to identify yourself with your thoughts, and you're not your thoughts. They're
Mhm.
just thinking on their own, and the idea is to. So mindfulness is more akin to a mirror where you're just seeing them, in a mirror where you're just acknowledging the presence of thought. You're not ignoring them. You're not trying to suppress those thoughts. You're not trying to, ignore or suppress those thoughts. And you're not trying to prevent them from rising. They rise and they fall. You just acknowledge their presence in a non-judgmental way. For those people who think that they can meditate, you can do it in an incremental fashion. Do it for 5 minutes in a day, and then after a week go up to 10 and 15. I mean,
What was
mhm.
it like for you at the beginning of this, when you first started and when you were still new to it? Was it relatively easy for you to just get into it? Or was there a time where you felt like, okay, I fell off from the practice and I need to get back into the saddle again? Like, how did you navigate that time?
I would say it was difficult initially because I had like a lot of expectation, or I had like a misperception about the practice itself. I thought the practice was supposed to be soothing, or it was supposed to. I mean, mostly it is, but if you go into thinking that if you meditate and you're going to be a calm person, calmness is a relative thing. Maybe calmer compared to when you didn't meditate, but you know, that's also a relative thing. I mean, if you meditate and if you think that your thoughts are going to go away and then you'll be in a perfect state of clarity, that's a myth.
Mm.
I mean, it could lead you to that state, but more often, it's most meditative sessions are all dry sessions. I mean, I could be sitting and then like this morning, I was sitting and a thought came to my mind about a patient of mine who lives in Alaska, and then now we used to practice telemedicine, and now I'm not licensed in Alaska and I can't see him. So all these random thoughts arise, or I may be sitting here and I could be planning a vacation somewhere, and that thought may arise. So for an entire hour, all I do is I recognize the presence of thought, and sometimes it's hard. Like sometimes you get carried away in their story, and then after 5 minutes you realize, oh, I'm getting caught up in the story. And then you try to, and then you, in a very compassionate and non-judgmental manner, you bring your focus to your anchor point, which is more often breath or just the rise or fall of your chest, or breath, like moving in and out of nostrils. It could be a clock, or, you know. So so I don't want to give a false impression that now with my um, practice of over a decade, my meditative sessions are somehow better than a person who hasn't started to meditate. It's more or less the same. I think I see more benefits now, so I look forward to meditating every day. And sometimes when I feel lazy, especially on the weekends where I don't wake up at 4:30 if I don't have to, I may meditate in the evening. When I was much younger in my 20s, I mean my mid 30s, when I was much younger in my mid 20s, I would, if I didn't meditate in the morning, I would probably skip for the day. But now I do see the benefits and I look forward to meditating. But that doesn't mean that, and then previously I had that expectation that, it would somehow calm my mind, which it does. And I wouldn't say more so in, it could do it in overt ways. You could just feel a sense of peace or calmness. But it does more so in a lot of subtle ways, and it takes time for you to understand that.
Fantastic. So it sounds to me that, meditation, which is your practice, is really helping you to be present at every moment at the most optimal state that you can be. And that has you can feel that impact, the benefit more now than ever because of this ongoing practices you have. Is that fair
Mhm.
to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about reactivity, and because of this practice, the reactivity part is less, right? Putting the context of, you and then people you work with who are in the health sector, what does it mean, like less reactive? What kind of a benefit do you and the people in the health sector can have if their reactivity is less, because of these practices in terms of their work?
I mean, there are, healthcare emergencies where you need to respond immediately. Um, um, and it's a sort of an automatic thing where you learn something and it just becomes second nature, and then you don't question it. But it's always, even in those situations, it's always good to have that gap where you are not reacting to something like a lab value, and where you have that gap or perspective, and you have that detached view that, hey, why do I need to do something? Is it really necessary? Would it benefit my patient, or would it improve my patient's quality of life? So you can gain that perspective if you're a meditator, and then the more you do, that comes pretty naturally to you. So you do get that benefit, once you start meditating. I mean, one of the first things that you realize when you start to meditate is that you're not your thoughts. You're beyond your thoughts, and thoughts just arise as a result of conditions that are impersonal. You know, um, so when you identify less with your thoughts, it's not that you're trying to suppress them or ignore their presence. You're still acknowledging them as thoughts. You can then choose to, from the various thoughts that arise, you can choose which thoughts to entertain, and which thoughts to ignore.
That's great. I mean, your work and people who are in the health sector, basically they are working with people's health and also lives, right? So it's a
Mhm.
very sacred job, and at the same time, it's tremendously high responsibility. And so to have such effect, in being able to have that clarity at the time of um, emergency, I think it it's a very valuable, benefit you're talking about here. Um, do you have any anecdote or any actual, personal experiences when you feel like, okay, wow, like now I feel that there's a clarity more present with me. Anything that happened in the past for you?
I wouldn't say that I've, I mean, if I look deeply, maybe I have those instances, but I can, you know, because of HIPAA, I can't tell you about the patients, but I've encountered many situations where I just reacted to things, even, and then I do it even now. And in retrospect, I'm like, I shouldn't, I could have easily waited and let things pass, and so I still, do get reactive mind states, but I think with practice, even, you gain more and more clarity. So I know of several, decisions that I've made that was just like in reaction to, um, you know, lab value, or as a kidney doctor, uh, it's it's a pretty objective field in medicine where we see, a patient's blood pressure or weight or the lab values, and then we kind of, make decisions based on that, and sometimes, and then we often change medications based on their lab values, and then, and then that's what I used to do before, where they get labs every month or so, and I would just react and change. But now I am more cognizant of the trend that matters more than an absolute lab value. I mean, absolute values may be important, if it's a life-threatening situation, but I'm more, I have that, I've developed that gap where I tend to look at the trend more than the absolute value. It's not that I ignore the absolute values, but if they're life-threatening, I do have to tend to those values. But what I do see now that's even more important is the trend, and I think that did come from my practice.
Indeed. Um, when you look around, and of course you've been in this sector for many years now, when you look around and you see your colleagues, people you may not work with but within the same sector, um, what do you see in terms of their level of stress, or just the overall well-being, as a professionals? The reason why I'm asking you is there's a lot of talk around burnout of health professionals in recent years. Maybe it's something that's been going on sometimes, and now it's really catching people's attention. But as a someone who's been in this sector and working with many, like, what do you see? Is there anything that you notice as a kind of like a habit or maybe pattern of you know those who work together that needs to be paid attention more?
I mean, burnout is a concept. I think um, was it's not that it wasn't there before. I think people have started to talk about it more. I mean, it could be because of the amount of stress that the medical professionals have to go through, at various stages of their career, and it's pretty, different fields. I mean, depending upon where you are in medicine, different fields are very competitive to get into, and then you're often compared with your colleagues, and that can cause a tremendous amount of stress. Plus, with the workload, and your responsibilities for your patients, and just trying to fulfill them can also create a lot of stress, and lack of sleep, and then you're just constantly moving around and trying to take care of patients, and also when you're a resident or a fellow, also trying to study. So that can create a lot of stress, and can be cause burnout. I think I wouldn't say this wasn't there before, but I think we have started to acknowledge that now, and then there are programs now where where in, be it in medical school or residency or fellowship programs, where there are people in the leadership who have in various divisions have assigned a go-to person. If you're feeling burnt out, and and they often advocate for a wellness practice to help with burnout.
Thank you, Abal. Is there any other things that you would like to share with us about well-being, how that intersect with your work that I haven't asked?
I think in my practice, just my sitting meditation and then my running, I think both of them complement each other. And it's exercise can have both physical and mental benefits. Mindfulness practice has mental more and also some physical benefits. So I think both of them complement each other. So if you can kind of maintain that having both, I think that'll lead to a tremendous amount of well-being.
But if there's anything that you feel like, at the institutional level in this health sector, or even like a wider, more societal level, that we should be actually taking a better close look at, as people, we need to actually change for the well-being of healthcare professionals.
I mean, I'm a big believer in mindfulness meditation, so having that practice at every level would definitely help. Um, Beyond that, I think each organization is unique and has its own setbacks and challenges. So as long as the leadership at the top, or is able to address the needs and is able to fulfill it, I think that'll lead to less burnout. But having a practice would definitely help.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abal.
Yeah.